Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, this is Carl Seidel, and you're listening to The People's View. Today we have Greg Moore, the New Hampshire Director of the Americans for Prosperity. Greg, welcome aboard.
Well, Carl, thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it, and looking forward to talking about a lot of the things we're doing up in Concord and nationally on trying to expand economic freedom.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get into this position? And I know you've been all things up in Concord, including Chief of Staff of the former Speaker of the House.
Well, that's right. But just prior to this, I worked closely with you, Carl, up at the House of Representatives, where I served as the Chief of Staff up there. And I've worked in New Hampshire in a number of different capacities, whether it was as a Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations for the Department of Health and Human Services, been involved in various political campaigns, as well as doing some consulting as well, mostly on public affairs work with small businesses and even mid-sized businesses, both in New Hampshire and as well as some other close nearby states. So it's great to be able to stay in New Hampshire. I think it's a fantastic place, great environment, and it's got a great sense of political activity. Particularly here in Nashville, it's a very vibrant community, and I think it's great. And
how is the AFP going to make it even better?
Well, Americans for Prosperity is a nonprofit whose sole focus is trying to find ways to build and expand economic freedom. And we work hard to try to educate the public about the importance of economic freedom, about how free countries and free states are the ones that perform well, and that means working hard with states all across this country, as well as working nationally to try to, in competition with other countries in the globe, to make us as free as possible. In other words, making sure that we have a tax structure that takes as little as possible from individuals, working families, as well as employers, and tries to keep regulation low, and works on just basically having sound fiscal policy, limited regulation, giving people an opportunity to grow themselves and to grow their economic possibilities, because that's truly how wealth has been created in this country. And we've seen across the globe, the more economically free countries, it's not just that they're the wealthiest countries, they also have the highest life expectancy, highest literacy. And so we see a whole measure of metrics by which economic freedom tends to correlate with better quality of life. And we see that not just in America, but also internationally. And there's a concerning trend we're on. In 2000, in the International Index, the United States was ranked number 3 overall for economic freedom. That's a pretty good standard we were setting. And we're only behind Hong Kong and Singapore, which are very small countries. So. As far as the significant countries, America really was, by and large, the greatest and the freest country. We've seen that falling, and in the most recent standings, we've fallen down to 17th. And we've fallen behind countries like Finland and Denmark, not necessarily countries that we would normally associate with economic freedom. And so Americans for Prosperity exists in many ways to get us back to those ideals that made us the freest country and helped us become the economic superpower that we are, and trying to build opportunities for individuals to get a good job, to create wealth, and to really have an opportunity to enjoy the benefits of their own personal freedom.
And how do you get your message across to the people? How are you telling people?
Well, I think we work closely directly at a policy level, and that means that we work with at a grassroots level to try to talk about the importance of economic freedom. In other words, we won't just talk about an individual issue that's before a legislature or before Congress, but we'll actually start the process by discussing one-on-one or in groups with people about just how important economic freedom is. And we can talk about the differences of a free economy based upon a lot of the teachings of economists such as Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, people of that nature, and how that's very different from the more centralized economic role we've seen in countries that frankly haven't performed so well, such as the former Soviet Union and as well as a lot of those other command and control economies. So from our perspective, it starts with an education process. If people don't understand the value of economic freedom, they're not going to be motivated to act. And then once people begin to understand the importance of it, then the next step is to sort of activate them and get them involved at the grassroots level, sort of a ground-up approach, and then to interact directly with their policymakers to try to implement good, sound policy decisions. And that's again getting to a lot of the ideals that New Hampshire likes to hold ourselves out as far as being a free state in terms of having a lot of personal freedom, a lot of economic freedom, low taxes, limited government, less of a regulatory scheme, and allowing businesses to flourish here. So that's basically how we try to work. Is start at education, and then from that education, take that to the next level, which means getting involved in government.
Well, I know you've had some meetings. I don't know whether they're just fundraisers, but you had some good speakers. But do the people find out about all these other methods of getting educated from your website?
Absolutely. We have a great website that people can go to and check out. In addition to understanding more about Americans for Prosperity, there's a lot of information that's on the issues of the day, whether it's at the state level. We have a state-specific website, or we have a national website so people can learn about what's going on in Washington. Our website is www.americansforprosperity.org. And the New Hampshire one, you can go on that website and scroll to the New Hampshire page, and it will take you right to New Hampshire, and you can look at some of the issues that are facing specific to New Hampshire, or you can go to the generic page, the americansforprosperity.org page, and look at a lot of the things that are going on in Washington as well. So we want to be an information source for people to understand what are the issues that are currently facing us, and how people can get involved and get activated.
Do you then in turn participate in some of these elections with the different people? I mean, you endorse any candidates?
Americans for Prosperity does not get involved directly in elections. What we do is we get directly involved in educating voters so that people understand economic freedom, understand the importance, the difference, as well as to understand where the various candidates stand on issues of economic freedom. We want people to go in and become as educated as possible. We want people to have a clear sense of what the overriding issues are, how they impact economic freedom, as well as where the various candidates stand on the issues. And I think that's an important role in electoral politics. But even when they get into office, it's also important they continue because even if you have people who are totally committed towards economic freedom, sometimes they even need to be reminded about the important principles that are at play.
And certain laws or proposed laws come into play, and how the unintended consequences come about sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And right now, for example, up in Concord, where you were, and it's an issue that I'm sure you're very familiar with because it was an issue that went through your old committee.
It was turned down twice while I was there.
is the issue of expanding the gas tax.
Right.
The House of Representatives just voted. Initially, they voted on passing a 15-cent per gallon gasoline tax and diesel tax increase, and they've simply taken it down a mere 3 cents. So it's a 12-cent per gallon increase in the gas and diesel tax. Now that's an enormous burden to place on consumers. If you think about it, it's a 67% increase in the tax. So it would go from 18 cents to 30 cents, and we would go from having the lowest gas tax in New England to having the second highest behind only Connecticut. And I think that most people know if you're driving down south, you try to avoid Connecticut because of the price of gas down there. And we don't want to become that. We don't want to become a state where people say, oh, let's drive through New Hampshire quickly so that we can buy our gas in Massachusetts or Maine or Vermont. So Americans for Prosperity has stepped in and led an effort to try to oppose this gas tax. And to think about it, we talk about, a lot of the proponents talk about all the great things you can do with the money. Here in Nashua, the prime sponsor, Dave Campbell, has spent a considerable amount of time talking about the importance of building roads and building bridges. But what we want to do is take the focus and put it back on the individual and what it would mean to the average person who's impacted by it. Now, if you think about it, 20 gallons is what most people would consider a fill-up, a tank of gas. That's about $2.50 more. And that's almost the price of a gallon of milk. So for a struggling family who's trying to get by, they might have to make the decision between, do I fill my tank or do I buy milk for my family? And these are the types of decisions that we think need to be in play. We need people to think about, wait a second, let's get outside of the bubble of Concord and talking about, oh, how do we expand this road or what have you, and start taking it back to the people. Say, wait a second, how is this, what are the implications of this vote on my constituents? And so we want to remind them, and we want to have their constituents remind them about hey, wait a second, it's a tough economy. The last thing I need is to have another $2.50 every time I fill up for a tank of gas, and so we don't want people to lose sight of the focus of this important issue that's currently facing the legislature. So we set up a website, a petition website, a separate one, which is www.stopnhgastax.com, where people can go and sign an online petition that we'll take to the Senate, and we'll let the senators know about the many New Hampshire residents who've already signed up. And so if people want to add their voice to that effort, I would hope they would go to that website, again, www.stopnhgastax.com, and sign the petition and put your voice with the rest of the many people who've signed up already.
Well, there are a few other things. They're supposed to be income generators for the state. Are you doing similar things for the gambling or the cigarette tax? Or?
Well, our focus is on, besides the gas tax, it's on the budget generally.
Right.
And the view of all these increased taxes and fees included in the budget. Governor Hassan, when she introduced a budget, not counting the gas tax because that was in a separate piece of legislation, but just in the budget itself had 10 tax and fee increases. And most of those tax and fee increases are on small businesses. And as we know, in New Hampshire, small business is the backbone of our economy. And so if we on one hand say we want to help small business to grow and create jobs, then we can't on the other hand say, oh, but by the way, we're going to hit you with all these new tax increases. So we've spent a considerable amount of time going out talking about these tax increases, saying, look, we want to be able to create an environment here in New Hampshire that allows us to flourish and grow. We don't want to become an economic backwater because we have high taxation. Our business taxes are already too high. It's great that we don't have the sales tax. It's great that we don't have an income tax. But unfortunately, we have some of the highest business taxes in the nation. And so as in the legislature, you worked hard because in the last legislature, there are 20 tax and fee reductions, and most of them were on small businesses to allow them to grow. Well, unfortunately, we're going right back with Governor Hassan's budget. And so AFP has stepped into that role and said, look, let's keep these tax reductions that you put in place in the system. Let's allow these small businesses to start growing and flourishing and adding jobs. We have 43,000 New Hampshire residents who are unemployed. And as you know, it's not just the unemployed, it's the underemployed. And it's not just the unemployed and underemployed, it's also the people who have jobs, but not jobs that they really want. And they want to be able to have a vibrant economy so that someone coming out of college has a chance to get a job that's in their field, in their career. So they're not just working, they're building towards a career. And we're not seeing that right now. And it's a difficult time. We're losing our young people in part because of it. And so we need to start taking the steps to rebuild our economy so that our young people can stay, so that older workers have a chance to work, and the people who are displaced and have been laid off. And unfortunately, there have been way too many of that. I know BAE right here in Nashua is just laying off a number of highly skilled workers. And we want to make sure that they can find jobs in their career field. We don't want to lose them. We don't want to lose them to another state.
Have you looked at or worked on any programs to get jobs here or to provide the proper education for the skills that are needed by these new companies?
Well, one of the first steps we're doing, first and foremost, is to create a positive business environment. And that starts first and foremost with reducing one of the highest tax burdens. But it also means we have taking a step back from some of the regulations. I mean, New Hampshire has high taxes for business and a regulatory scheme that it's not at the bottom of the barrel like we are as far as business taxes, but it's in the middle of the road. And we want to be we want to take that up to being in the top 5, like in a number of the economic indicators we are for personal income taxes, for having no sales tax, for having no income tax. We want to see that type of freedom that we see in other areas, and we want to see that extended to our regulatory scheme. So if we're able to get that in place, we'll create that positive business environment, and we'll create new jobs. But in terms of working, there's a project we're working on right now relative to higher education. We all think the cost of public education, public higher education, is too high. UNH, Plymouth State, Keene State, all very high as far as some of the highest tuitions nationally. And we want our young people, if they stay in college, Carl, chances are they're going to stay here afterwards.
Yeah.
But if they go off to another state and study, as you know, there's a good chance they might not come back. So what we want to do is we're looking for opportunities as far as how we can make public universities more affordable here in New Hampshire. And one of the research projects that I've been working on has to do with the issue of sabbaticals. People might not know it, but we actually pay professors not to teach. It might sound strange, but how many other jobs pay their employees not to show up for work? But we do, and we looked into it, and between the 178 full years that have been taken off by professors in the last 10, as well as the part years off, it added up to about 550 professor years that were lost to people taking sabbaticals. At a time when we're trying to make college education more affordable, that total added up to, at the low end, at the very low end, about $65 million over 10 years.
Really?
And if you look at the growth in the total compensation to professors, for a 10-year professor, back 10 years ago, the average compensation package was about $105,000. Now it's about $140,000. So when a professor takes a sabbatical now, that's $140,000 that they're getting paid. It also means that somebody has to fill in for their position. So some other professor has to step in, or they need to hire somebody else on a temporary basis to come in and step in and offer that course. So these are the types of steps that we work on to try and find ways to make higher education more affordable. Because as you know, the university system's standard response has been, well, give us more taxpayer dollars. Well, the flip side of that is the taxpayers have to pay those dollars. So if we're going to ask the taxpayers to hand out another $50, $100 million to the university system, that means that we have to raise taxes on an individual, which ultimately hurts our economy and makes it harder to create jobs. And so it's one of those cases, okay, we want to make colleges more affordable, but at the cost of jobs, is it really the trade-off? So what we have to do is look at the system as a whole and find opportunities to make the system more streamlined, more efficient, and to provide better services to the individuals. And there have been 4 states that have actually put moratoriums on sabbaticals in difficult economic times recently. And maybe it's a case where New Hampshire wants to look at that as well.
I think they have to look at something. I was on the Public Works Committee, as you know, and we handled the capital expense. And one of the things, and one of the reasons why the colleges got that big pay cut, if you say, from the state, was because we felt that the overhead was just too high on the universities. They had too many people and a lot of administrative jobs, not just teaching. And we cut back, and what they asked for in capital improvements, the committee that I was on handled, was they wanted a program where they wanted another $50 million, and we said no. We gave everything to the community colleges because the community colleges have paid attention to this need. They've opened new skill areas. They've kept their tuition down. They've kept the administration overhead down. And that's what the example that the four-year colleges have to provide. I mean, they have to, take advantage of.
And I think that that's a great point, particularly talking about the community colleges, which I think are really a gem here in New Hampshire. We have an outstanding community college system, and not everyone needs a four-year degree to begin a career they want to start. And some people can also start at a community college, go there for 2 years, and then go move on to a four-year college and save themselves a lot of money. I mean, you could save a significant amount of money just by going to community college for 2 years and then transferring it to a UNH or another public college, and of course all those credits transfer. So I think that that's really a case where as a legislature and as a legislator, you had to say, where am I getting the best bang for the buck? And if the college and university system are trying to ask themselves, how do we pay our professors not to teach? And the community college system is saying, hey, look, we're going to try to figure out new ways where we can create skill-building opportunities for students that readily translate into jobs. It seems to me that one system is really focused on creating value for their students. Another system maybe more focused on sort of the worldview of higher education, which appears to be sort of this arms race that appears to be going on between the various universities across the Northeast in the country.
Well, the Northeast has some elite schools, and people look at that more than anything else. I saw something on TV today that amazed me. A person from China just bought a $1 million condo for his 2-year-old child because he wants her to go to one of the elite schools in the Northeast.
Just have to wait 16 years
How
to get some
about
value out of that.
I don't know about that, but it just shows how some people want to splurge on something like that. But what Nashua Community College and I think it's Granite State College has done is they mesh their program together. It's a smooth way of transitioning to a four-year college, a very smooth way, because some of the classes are offered right here in Nashua.
Absolutely. No, I think that the public higher education system has to be the beginning because if you're talking about a public education system, there should be value creation. We shouldn't be looking at how do we add as many different programs as possible. We should be talking about how can we take the programs and translate them into skills that people can leave a public college or a public university and immediately go into the workforce and be able to thrive. And I think that's one example, but there are a lot of other examples throughout state government that you've seen, where we have to make sure that everything we're doing is creating value. Look at, for example, the huge number of licenses we're offering. Why do we offer more licenses in the state of California? Why do we need these huge regulatory schemes to try to find ways to license every single profession out there? And the reality is that it's because a various group of people got together and thought that was a good idea. And no one thinks 30, 40 years later, do we still need to have that around? I know that there was a committee that was in place the last 2 years in the House called the Recodification Committee. And one of their important goals was to look at old laws and old structures in state government. It just didn't make any sense. And unfortunately, with the transition in the House, they got rid of that committee, which is unfortunate because we need to review state government and renew state government to make sure that it's as updated as possible and to make sure that the people are getting good value from their government. I mean, that's one of the reasons why government gets so expensive over time. It just continues to grow, in large part because people have lost their focus and you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And that's one of the things that Americans for Prosperity, we say, wait a second, time out. Let's get back to the basics. What should government be doing? Why are we doing this? And we should question every single thing that they're doing, every dollar that's spent, every piece of legislation. If we're regulating something, there better be a darn good reason for it, because when you're regulating something, you're making it harder to do something. Now, granted, there is an important role of regulation, which is to try to keep a level playing field and to make sure that individual consumers have basically a basic understanding of what they can get when they want a good or a service. But we want to take and make sure that it's as limited as possible. We want to make sure that we're simply leveling the playing field. We're not trying to identify ways of telling people how to go out and live their lives. We think that economic freedom comes from people feeling as though they have an ability to take a chance, to try something new, to be innovative. And that means you can't have a regulatory scheme that says, no, you can't do that. Because that squelches innovation. That just crushes innovation. And if we're going to be a leader in terms of our economy going forward, if we want to be the beacon in the Northeast, if we want to be the fastest growing state that we once were, then we need to be as open as possible to innovation. That means making sure the government is kept in check as much as possible, and that people are allowed to flourish and try new ideas.
Well, I think that's something that we will have to look into. The federal government's even worse, obviously. It's larger, and there are a lot of places. We had Senator Ayotte on the other day, and she said there are programs there that are in 10 or more different agencies that are very similar, and nobody's ever thought or discussed about combining them and have it, run properly and done with a much more effective manner.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's absolutely true. I mean, if we're going to start talking about New Hampshire government and talk about the things that are wrong with it, boy, is it a breath of fresh air compared to the federal government. I mean, our state government is wonderful in comparison, and it's unfortunate because we're all federal taxpayers too, and our tax dollars are paying for these huge bureaucracies with massive overheads, which are taking away from our citizens' ability to again grow and be innovative, as well as just to live a life with freedom and the opportunity to enjoy yourself. The real focus of the federal government has been in many cases how to create a fiefdom and hang on to it. and so each of those programs has a constituency. And so while those of us on the outside say, well, it's ridiculous that it might be spread across 10 programs. Well, for the people who depend upon that fiefdom and depend upon that particular bureaucracy, they will fight to the death to make sure that they don't lose it. So what's in the best interest of the public as a whole is often not it's in the interest of a very small number of people who are willing to fight like crazy to keep things the way they are. And Senator Ayotte's been doing a great job. But I mean, one of the issues we look at is the issue of sequestration. Now, I will tell you that sequestration, you're talking about a little over 2% of the federal government. And when you listen to some of the people who were opposing it, including the president, it made it seem like the sky was going to fall. And
they made it that way.
There was going to be blood on the streets. We're going to see people dying all around us. And you know what happened? March 1st came and went. It's been a number of weeks, and you know what? Life has gone on, and that's one of the things that I think that probably scared them is that we would begin to sequester, and people would realize that, you know what? I can probably make do with 2% less federal government in my life, and that's just fine. And I think we saw that here in New Hampshire. The last budget, we passed a budget here in New Hampshire that actually reduced state spending by almost 11%.
Right.
And guess what?
Yeah.
The citizens of New Hampshire managed to get by with 11% less state government. Well, if we can get by with 11% less state government, chances are that the citizens of the United States can get by with a little over 2% less federal government. And so Senator Ayotte was right in supporting a lot of these reductions. She's done a marvelous job in terms of voting against a lot of these wasteful programs. She stepped up, and granted, she even voted against the sequester because she knew she could see this coming. She saw it on the pike and said, "This is not a good deal," and because as much as the sequester is needed in terms of reducing the spending, unlike the budget you passed in the last 2 years, it just basically was a blunt instrument. It just said across the board, without giving flexibility, which is not the way to cut. The way you cut is if your people are truly committed to making reductions, like the legislature in the last 2 years was, then they can find a way. They can go into individual programs. the members of the Finance Committee of the House and the Senate go in and they say, okay, what can we do without, instead of just saying, okay, everybody gets a haircut. And that's not really the best way to go about doing it. You want to make sure that you're being very, very selective. Why are we paying for the robo-squirrel?
Yeah.
Why are we paying for videos studying the sex life of snails? I mean, this is just absolutely ridiculous. You've all seen the video of the little shrimp running on a treadmill and all the other wasteful projects that we've been talking about. Senator Ayotte has led the fight against what she calls the missile to nowhere.
Right.
And so we see all these numerous projects across government, including areas where we know are critical. We need to have a strong defense. But do we need a system that we know we're not going to use? And we have to ask ourselves, is this really the best way to spend the taxpayers' resources, particularly when we're running a $900 billion deficit this year, adding up to a $16.7 trillion national debt? So we really need to do is take a step back and say, wait a second, let's start doing this logically. And there are a number of people out there who've begun the process and are working very diligently behind the scenes in terms of how can we put together a budget that actually makes sense and makes these reductions. Unfortunately, as soon as you come out publicly, the second you come out, you get attacked. Because whoever's fiefdom is potentially going to be losing money or losing support, they're going to come in and lash out vigorously to try and stop whatever efforts in place.
Well, I hope that the public realizes what's happening and goes to the next election and makes some changes. I think that's the only thing that happened. When we did cut it, it's because we made changes in the number of people in the legislature who had that focus of cutting it down to a reasonable level. We have to do that on a national level now, too. I mean, all these companies that ran through this recession that had to cut back in logical ways. They either combined groups or reduced people that in programs that weren't reaching their objectives. And that's what I think the governments have to do. And there are enough states that prove that it could be done. We weren't the only state that was able to cut our budget.
Right now, what we're seeing is the real reforms are taking place at the state level. We're not seeing a lot of real reforms that are taking place at the national level. And I don't expect that we will start to see any real reforms at the national level anytime soon. But you take, for example, the issue of the Affordable Care Act, which has now, even the president has adopted the name Obamacare, and the impact that it's going to have upon the lives of people and how it's going to be implemented. There was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, former Kansas Governor Kathleen Sebelius, came out and acknowledged that the notion that was being put forth during the discussions around this legislation, that it would actually reduce the cost of health care, were absolutely wrong. And health care premiums are going to go up significantly. We're going to be seeing people being taxed for not having health care. We're going to be seeing taxes on medical device manufacturers. We're going to be seeing taxes on businesses. We're going to be seeing taxes on health insurers. 18 new or increased taxes are part of this proposal. And beyond that, a whole slew of new mandates, stepping on state regulations, saying, no, for states, for years you've been running your health care. Don't worry about it. We're going to tell you how to do it. And basically, it's been nationalizing a lot of what's behind health care. And so we're facing an environment now where we're seeing higher health care costs. We're seeing more people being pushed onto government health care, which if you look historically, does not save money and does not do a good job of producing high quality outcomes. And so we're now seeing what happens when things go wrong in government. When government fails, there are real consequences. We're going to see this happen on January 1st of 2014, when the bulk of this law kicks in. The taxes, the higher cost for premium, and it's just a matter of time before we start to see a number of the other steps, like the $500 billion, $500 billion in reductions to Medicare. That's going to affect a lot of seniors. We're going to start to see people saying, how can I afford health care? It's cheaper just to pay the tax versus actually having health care because you've made health care so expensive. So the effort was to try to reduce the number of uninsured, but a number of people are going to say, I can't afford to have health care, and it's cheaper for me to not have health care. You're going to see businesses say, look, with these higher premiums, it's easier just to pay the fine, and we'll just
Or
keep
you
the
work
people off.
29 hours a week instead of
And that's another step, which is the disincentives that are being created as well. So for instance, we say, okay, 30 hours a week, I now have to offer you health care. You're working 29 hours a week. So now, if I'm a worker, I need to work 29 hours here, a few hours there, a few hours there. So I'm splitting my job up, as they call it, job splitting. And now we're starting to see a whole host of adverse consequences that are going to come with this. So we're going to be in for a rough road over the course of the next few months. And Americans for Prosperity has been fighting a lot of the implementation of that. We'll continue that.
Well, I guess they'll look at your website and see what information they can get out of that. And I think maybe they'll be more aware of what's happening here and what the options are.
Absolutely, absolutely. AmericansForProsperity.org. We ask
Okay.
everyone to go and take a look.
Well, I think we've run out of time. Thank you very much for coming. It's been a very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Carl. Appreciate you having me.
And thank you, audience, for listening in. And don't forget, we're sponsored by the Nashua Republican City Committee. NashuaGOP.org is our website. And we meet the second Thursday of every month at the Crown Plaza, 6:30. And we have speakers and other programs that come on. So look us up. Contact us if you have any suggestions, questions, or comments on the show. Thank you very much for listening in. Thank you.